Gukesh, he's the man of the moment right now. An exceptional Olympiad performance. He's now into the top 20 in the world, and so I'm looking back at some of his incredible games which he's played in the last year or so. Now, this was played against Parham, another exceptional Iranian player, Iranian origin. Now, Firouz just kind of clouded over his performance, but he's in the 2700 club in his own right. He's only in his early 20s. And this is what Gukesh did to Parham in the World Blitz Championship, just played in 2021, so in December, so a recent-ish game. Destroys him here, 30 moves with black. Let's see what happened. So Parham goes d4, we had knight f6, c4, e6, and now knight c3 invites a mainline Nimzo-Indian here, and after bishop b4, e3 was now played, so one of the more solid lines here. Castles from black and bishop to d2. Just rock solid from Parham, but it's one of those kind of coiled spring systems for white, can get quite dangerous later on. So d5 played, very principled. Knight f3, and now pawn b6, prepares to fianchetto the bishop, and that's why takes on d5 was now played. The pawn recaptures, so if the bishop does want to come out this way, well, you've weakened some light squares on this side of the board. As ever, it's very kind of cat and mouse strategic stuff at this top level of chess. Now rook c1 was played, hits that half open file. c5 immediately played by Gukesh, he wants to liberate that backwards pawn. a3 put a question to the bishop, and the main move in this position here is giving up the bishop pair, and then white can recapture and has a better game overall in this position. I mean, as black, you can actually retreat there if you want to try and retain the bishop pair before going c5. But in this game, Gukesh really spices it up now, so he retreats the bishop to a5 here, a very provocative move, because if you can ever achieve this b4 break, you'll be trapping in that bishop. Now Parham here, he plays b4 immediately, but it's not the best move. Actually, the best way to play here was just with bishop e2, say we had bishop b7, just to give a sample line, and now when you get to here, black really has to commit this knight, and knight b to d7 is the most logical move in the position here, and now b4 is a very good move, striking at that clumsy looking bishop. And the difference here is that after black captures, if white now goes knight b5, which we saw in the game, looking at this square for example, also here, well, now the knight has already committed to d7, so it can't come and sit on a6, which we saw in the game, just gluing everything together and keeping an eye on this pawn. So in this whole variation, well, now white's about to take here, trap your bishop, you'd have to take here, then white can capture, shatter the pawns, and this kind of line like this is better for white. Even though you're one pawn down after white recoups one, you should get this one back later on, and you've got good pressure here on these kind of dark squares. Still lots to play for, but white is actually better. I know that's a long line, but it's quite relevant to the game here, because bishop e2 wasn't played, instead b4 immediately, now pawn captures, now knight b5, and this time knight a6 comes. Like said, just glues this square, stops any knight c7, the queen still looks at d6, and the knight defends the pawn. And so that's why Parham now takes this one, because black's no longer obliged to take. Queen b3 was actually best here, by the way, forcing black to take here, because otherwise you are going to take, threatens to trap the bishop. And now at least you get to double the pawns, queen takes, but in this whole line, well, the knight hits b4 now. This is the big difference, the knight is so much more active from the a6 square. But Parham didn't go queen b3, he didn't force black to take on a3, instead he takes, and now black is unravelling, the bishop escapes, and Gukesh is a pawn up here. So queen a4 puts a question there, queen e7 defends that bishop once more, and now bishop e2 was the best move here, because at least in a line like this you can get castled. Probably Parham didn't do this because of knight e4, and now you can't castle or you're losing this bishop here. So say you take on b4, well, now the queens are coming off, black's a clean pawn up, difficult to actually create tricks for white. So I think because Parham wanted queens on, play for opportunity, he goes bishop d3 instead. And now after knight e4, he can chop that one, pawn recaptures, the knight hits this outpost, and although this bishop can take here, ruin the king's castling rights, well okay, at least he's got some advanced knight support points here, his rook's on the open file, who knows if his queen could become dangerous one day. So Parham was playing for these kind of tricks, but black's clearly better here. The king's stuck in the centre, and already you can go knight c5 actually, hit this queen, and if the pawn takes, well then you're picking up a knight here. This is good, you've opened the d file. Now Gukesh does similar soon, but not just yet. First he develops a bishop, now we had rook c3 played, and by the way, best here was actually to bring a rook to the d file. Just prepare something like this to castle by hand. Okay, black's still better, a pawn up, but at least you get your king to safety. What we had in the game was rook c3, preparing to double. The rook came to the d file, threatening to win a knight because of the pinned pawn here, as we can see. So the knight came to c6, the bishop has to chop off because these are forked, rook recaptures, and now Gukesh finds this nice knight c5 move. He hits the queen, and still the pawn is pinned, so queen c4 was played, and now just pawn h6. You can actually go knight d3 already as a good move, but pawn h6 just taking care of any back rank issues. Black's still better. The king sidestep to e2, breaks the pin, now knight d3, rook c7, hits the queen, queen f6, threatens to check down here, and now f3 was played. Very natural looking move. You want to undermine the protection of this knight, and now here Gukesh finds this really nice counter shot. He goes queen g6. So he eyes this diagonal still, yes, but he also looks here, threatening to take with check, hitting the rook, and white's really in some trouble now. It's not easy. The best move here is actually pawn to g4, blocking out that g-file threat. Now black would take here with check, and you hold the knight now in this variation, but then white can recapture, and you know there's no immediate winning check here. The pawn covers that square. After say pawn a6, you know the computer advises me this is the best variation. Knight c3, rook d6, preparing to swing, will then knight e4, provides some cover. Now the line goes on, rook e6, white wins the knight, but black comes here, it's winning it back, and you know there's pressure down here. Black's still quite a bit better, but at least white can fight a bit in this kind of position, going pawn to g4. But what we see in the game here, instead of g4, is takes on e4. Now a natural looking move, now you can prepare to take the knight, but now actually Gukesh is just crashing through here on g2. And probably Parham thought that Gukesh would be taking here, the king takes here, and okay, even though you win an exchange, look at that clump of pawns, you know, still very tense, there's no checkmate in this position here. But what Gukesh finds here is a different move to remove that knight and clear the d-file here. So he plays the beautiful move, knight back to e5, hitting this queen, and also now stopping the king from sliding up the board. So if you move the queen, say here, well now we crash through, the king can't come up, has to go back, awful position. So the knight was captured here, but now this opens the d-file for the rook. And you can actually mate in 5 with queen to g4 already, but Gukesh plays the more human, queen takes on g2 check, the king moves away, then he picks up the rook with check here, king e2, queen d1 check, and he's just driving the king around the board. Now the rook invades, king g3, and queen g1 check was the final move of the game. If you come to the h file here, well, we're mating like this. And if you come to the f file, same problem. And this one's even more beautiful. The triple pawns here, just completely cutting the king from actually escaping from that file and getting out of the checkmate. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this game. If you want to see another amazing one between Gukesh and Alireza, click here and subscribe to the channel. Do see below. Thanks very much for watching and see you soon.